Recording in progress.
Hey, Steve, I'll suggest if you get a chance, try to wipe the camera with a cloth or something. It might help get rid of some of those glares you're seeing.
You should see my screen. I guarantee it'll help.
I don't know what I'm doing. I came in too late. I was too distracted.
Whatever you're more comfortable with. Have this. There's another one. Let's just this will be short. We've been talking about this. Notable sense of writing history. Yeah, we got a big deal.
Hi, Tabitha. A nice suggestion. That totally cleaned up the screen.
It did. It looks great.
Now I got a clean spot though.
Yeah, so that keyboard and mouse for a second. You can change your display here to
Oops. You
So-
can have it.
so it works.
Definitely don't give it to me.
There we go.
Thank
Just in case, I don't think we will actually-
you. Thanks, Daryl.
No problem.
And Megan. So a little fun fact, I don't know if you can see my camera or not, but we're building out our new corporate office here. And what I'm holding here in my hand is a prescription card from 1909, 2/5/1909 for cannabis.
I
Yeah,
don't think that's legal today, Steve.
no, well, you mean I can't get a new prescription? Okay, well, anyway, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool, I've got two of them here. These two
Nice.
prescription cards, they're really cool pieces of history.
Where'd you find those?
They're part of our museum and our onboarding room, that when we onboard everybody, they'll walk through the history of cannabis and where it all began from the early 1900s to today where we are, and stuff like that. So it's gonna be pretty cool. Yes, you're gonna have to come by and check it out because we've got tickets from Woodstock. We've got all sorts of cool stuff.
Which location?
Oh, this is our new Scottsdale location, which nobody has been to yet. Yes. I can't wait for Tabitha to come over here.
Parking better there?
Oh, yeah, we have 113 parking spots.
I had to walk like a mile last time I was at one of your sites.
Yeah, this is a really, really good spot. The waste management is going to have a whole new meeting starting next year.
Yes, of course.
All right, we're going to give it one more minute and then we'll call the meeting to order. Test, test, test. Okay. Thanks.
Hello, hello. Oh, Megan's gonna have to say something,
Is it
I
working?
promise.
Yeah, we got you, Steve. All right, thanks everyone for joining the Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council. My name's Jessica Rigler with the department chairing this council meeting, and I'd like to welcome everyone and call the meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. I'll just run down my list. If you are here, please make sure you unmute yourself and let us know. We'll start with Sam Richard.
I am here, thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Tracy.
I am here, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Steve Cottrell, we know you're here. Murray Stein.
Here.
Hi, Murray.
Hey.
Matt Lascala.
Here.
Thank you. Andrew Preventio.
Andrew is en route. I just left him at lunch and he had to get to his house. So he will be joining us shortly if he's not on yet.
Okay, thank you. Tabitha. Hi, Tabitha. Hope Jones.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
I hope. Joseph Domena. Do you see Joe on there? Okay. Okay, thank you. Jay Neary. Jay? All right. Vince Figarelli.
Here.
Thanks, Vince. Zhonggao Zhong. Okay, it looks like you're muted, but we've got you for roll call. Thank you. Max Long.
Hello here.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks.
And Alvin Altamirano.
I'm here.
Thank you. Ty Garber. No Ty. All right. It looks like we have quorum. Just a quick check for Andrew, Joe, Jay, Vince, or Ty. Excuse me, Vince, I got you. Sorry. Andrew, Joe, Jay, or Ty.
Andrew
Anyone
just texted me, asked me if the meeting is off. I'm going to email him the link, so he is. Just letting you know.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. If he can just write in the chat when he joins, that would be helpful. All right, we're going to get started now. Just a quick review of the committee's charge, which I know you're all familiar with, but it's written into statute 362821. This committee exists to make recommendations to the director. It's an advisory council that annually now reviews the marijuana testing programs under Chapter 26 and 28.2, and provides a report to a whole bunch of elected officials as well as the department with an assessment as to whether any analytes should be removed from a required statutory testing panel, reviewing the statements of deficiency and any remediation actions, and any of the recommendations on improving testing programs. So just a quick level set on all of those things. We've got a pretty packed agenda today, so we're going to try and move through it pretty rapidly. I just call your attention to not just the agenda, but the agenda detail form. I'm holding it up here. It's a little matrix, and it has a little bit more information about various agenda items, as well as the background on some of them and any proposed motions that were submitted as well, to help follow along too. So I'd like to start with a quick review of the Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council report. Just as a reminder for you all, per statute, the council is required to submit a report to several elected officials by the second Monday in January each year. And so what we've sent out to you is a draft version of that report. You'll notice it's got some blanks in it, and I tried to denote those with yellow highlights in them for a couple of items. So one, of course, is related to any proposed and passed motions that are made today, to leave space to include those in the report. The other notable highlight in there is related to the statements of deficiency and any remediation efforts. All of the numbers in there are highlighted in yellow because they are provisional numbers. The intention of the department would be to update these numbers to go through December 31st, 2021, as well as to update the appendices of this report with the current records through December 31st, 2021. So I'd like to seek some input from the council on the draft of this report. And ultimately, as you can see from the agenda detail matrix, we'd be looking for your approval to adopt the report, as well as any changes notated in the highlights to reflect both today's meeting, as well as changes in our numbers for statements of deficiency and remediation actions through the end of this calendar year to capture the full year. So I'll open it up and see if anyone has any comments on the report.
Jessica, I got a quick question. Has we voted on DDPV already? I just want to confirm that.
According to my notes at the last meeting, that was one of the 4 pesticides that the council voted to remove from the testing panel. I'll just double check if anyone else has a different record than that. No.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if we can, change on that, but I actually have concern with this particular analyze, because this one is an organophosphate insecticide. I mean, not only that, it is one of the non-food use insecticide that is quite toxic, and also it is one of the older pesticides that it is accessible. It's one of the older pesticides that you can actually just get in a Home Depot. People can use it for storage, and it can actually get into the supply chain as a contaminant. So I just want to bring it up. I'm not sure if we actually have talked about this, but this is not something that we want to have, like in the cannabis.
Hey, Maxwell, what analyte is it? What's the name on it?
She's DDPV, Dicova.
Okay.
It's the second one.
Yep.
Yeah, because I certainly, want to bring up, the concern with this analyze, not only because of its toxicity, but potential exposure, in the supply chain. I just want to bring this up, that's all.
Well, it's alarming that it's a pesticide that's found, or an insecticide that's found in Home Depot. So then that's something that's very readily available.
Yeah.
I know that we should, Tabitha and Ryan Tracy probably, and maybe Hope, need to comment on this, because they're the ones that have, not Hope, but originally requested it to be taken off because of the difficulty of seeing it, or they never see it. DDVP, Tabitha.
Yeah, the reason we recommend it to remove it, it's a little bit difficult to test for with all the rest of the pesticides. It's just a harder compound, and you need a different probe to run it in most instances, so it's very costly to do. And also that we haven't seen a detect for this as to date, and it's been a year now, and we haven't even had anything at our minimal reporting limit. And so therefore we haven't even seen anything at maximum allowable limit either. So it's not even a bump in the baseline for that compound. So that's why we recommend that one.
Yeah, if you can confirm that there is no detection, I mean, not even, like above, but below the action limit, if you can confirm that, then based on the information of lack of exposure, then, I would not object, but this one, at least based on my data set from California, this is unfortunately one of the organophosphate insecticide that is commonly available and it has been detected in cannabis in the other report before. So I just want to bring it up, that's all.
What I wouldn't be opposed to doing is continuing to monitor for it, because in most instances when we purchase the standard, it is going to be included in one of the compounds that's in the standard already, and to calibrate for it regardless, and just to monitor if we ever do start to see detects and report it back to ADHS. I wouldn't be opposed to that at all.
Okay.
Thanks, Tabitha. That was going to be my recommendation. I did a hand raise to see if it's something that we should monitor, or I know it's not within our preview currently, but maybe there should be a list of analytes that could be occasionally tested for, not necessarily a part of the entire panel. But I know we don't have a way of doing that now. So that might be something as a group that we consider making a motion for. Not at this time. I'm not ready to propose one at this time, but I do think before we wrap up, we should consider if there's a group of compounds that we want to make a motion and see if that's something that we want to get going.
There's about 75% of the list now that we commonly don't see detects at all, or even something at our lowest calibration point. And we do calibrate pretty low over here. So, but those are easier to calibrate for and monitor and have a passing acceptance criteria to be able to report, which is an issue. But I do know with our LIMS system, I'm not sure what everybody else is using, but we're able to run some historical numbers to prove, especially the 4 or 5 that I gave recommendations for removing, that we haven't seen any detects at a reporting limit. And I would imagine that the other labs could probably show some kind of historical data proving that's true, not just for my lab, but the other ones as well, if it would give more confidence in making this kind of decision with this compound or these compounds.
Okay, so thank you for that discussion. I'd just like to kind of summarize what I heard there. Is the council then suggesting that perhaps there's a note on this one that lists it for removal as voted and approved at the last meeting, but has the laboratories continue to monitor for it as the recommendation from the council? Or would the council like to adjust to continue to test for DDVP while monitoring what the prevalence is of detection?
I wouldn't be opposed, as our lab could do it either way. It's not hard to monitor for it.
Then do we want to make a motion to kind of alter what we had originally agreed to on the last committee? So I make a motion to monitor and report back to the state all DDVP analytes in
Second.
testing. Thanks, Maxwell.
Thank you.
Do we allow discussion after the movement in the second? Because I'm happy to support it, but I just wanted to make mention of one piece.
Please go ahead, Sam.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know what the protocol was. We've seen some significant confusion in the marketplace around N1s and Q3s. So I just want to make a note around if we are going to continue to monitor these analytes, that they are communicated to the marketplace appropriately so they don't result in rejected orders. I just wanted to highlight that. I understand that they shouldn't, and there's communication happening in an ongoing process, but we're now adding one thing that could potentially have every COA have or a Q3 on it. for something that isn't required testing for compliance. That's the only, it's just a flag. I definitely support the thrust of where we're going, but I just want to mention that.
Sam, if we were to monitor it, we wouldn't be reporting it on the reports. If you had a defect or not, we would just simply be reporting any defects that we see to the state, so they would know that we're starting to see it. It wouldn't be if we took it off the list, it'd be off the list, but just monitored on our side and reported to the state if that's how they choose to do it that way.
Okay, well then I'm even more excited about that. So if that's how that happens, then that's perfect.
So Steve, you made a motion that Max seconded to monitor and report back to the state all DDVP analytes for testing. I just like to ensure that I fully understand the intent of that. So is the intent of that to leave DDVP in the report as is for removal with the note that it would be monitored and reported back to the state? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
And Max, your second is with that understanding as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Please say aye.
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 I just
Thank
have
you.
one quick
All
question.
opposed?
Oh, sorry.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay,
Just a quick question about the, so we all agree about monitoring these analytes, but I think we need to specify how frequent, the frequency of monitoring. Like, is it going to be every month or every what?
Every test.
If we monitor, it would be with every sample that goes through because we calibrate for it. We'd be able to see it every single time we process. those
Every single
samples.
time.
Mhm.
And when DHS comes in and audits, they get a full list of our data. So they'd be able to go through and see every analyte and every detect, and they pull it for quite some time.
Okay.
thank you. Any other comments on the report?
The only thing that I would say, this hasn't to do with them, but on the lab side of monitoring, it would be just be calibrating and monitoring, not having to uphold to the QC that the state puts down for all the compounds that are regulated. It's just a monitor screening. That makes sense. The lack of like Steve.
As a point of clarification too, and we had covered this in prior MTAC meetings, but I don't think that it's been revisited this session since we've re-engaged since the last couple of years, but the recommendations that are in this report that the council makes are recommendations. They still have to be formally reflected in the department rules before they take effect. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear to the council members as well, so that people are able to remain in compliance with the current regulations.
Jessica, I had a real quick question.
Yeah.
Are you looking for approval of this report before we do the other items on the agenda? Because some of those might result in motions or recommendations.
I totally agree with you, Murray. The idea on page 4 of the report, you'll see a bullet under section 2.2 that's highlighted to insert any additional approved motions from this meeting. And that is intended to capture that this report would reflect the current contents of the report in addition to the approved motions that occur subsequent to this today.
Super, thank you.
Yep. Other comments or questions on the report? Okay. Can I please get a motion to, I wrote a proposed motion in your detailed agenda, a motion to approve the report with the permission given to ADHS to update the yellow highlighted sections with any recommendations, approved motions from this December 7th meeting and the testing related deficiency and remediation action through December 31st, 2021.
Are you looking for a second? Because that
I'm
was
looking
lot.
for a motion.
I make a motion to exactly what Jessica just said. That was a lot.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Steve.
I'll second.
Who was the second from?
Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you so much. We will move on to the next section of our agenda, which is related to marijuana testing stakeholder meetings. That's me again. Okay, so there have been so many items that have been brought up for discussion amongst this group. We talked about a lot of things at the last meeting back in November. We've got additional items on the docket for this meeting today. Some of these things, it is my impression, and I think that others would agree, would benefit from more enhanced discussion outside of a public meeting forum in which you have to follow Robert's Rules of Order and some of these other things in order to get more specific feedback back to the department and allow for a better stakeholder engagement process. And so I would like to put out there for the council to consider is recommending to the department that we host one or more stakeholder meetings beginning in 2022 to discuss a variety of testing related topic areas, specifically as it gets into some technicalities around laboratory testing or some of the way the department posts, say, the lab lists on our website or some other topics like that. I've listed some examples in there. We do this through a number of ways. One is as we do rule writing with the department, we go through a stakeholder engagement process there for specific comments and feedbacks to wordsmith rule language. But I think there are also other opportunities for stakeholder meetings and feedback on how the programs are running, since we now have a year under our belts on how these programs are going. And so if it is the desire of the council, I would recommend that there's some consideration to moving to recommend the department host stakeholder meetings.
Jessica, if I could just jump in, just for a little clarification, are these stakeholder meetings are not public meetings, or they are?
They definitely can be public meetings. They would not be, because this council meeting, for example, is written to statute as an established council. It has a specific appointment process, right? You guys had to go through an application to fill it out. We have to have quorum in order to convene the discussion. There's requirements related to posting of minutes, agendas, all those kinds of things. It's a very formally structured meeting. So my recommendation isn't necessarily that, you know, we take out all the transparency from the process, but that we have some opportunities for more informal comments in addition to the stakeholder meetings that happen with rules where all of those comments and things are documented.
Okay, we'll still have some structure and some prior agenda prep to submit and all of those things, right? So that we can make sure we can accomplish things at these meetings.
Yep.
I think it's really up to the areas, and it could be some simple as, you know, some of the laboratories meeting with Steve and Mary to talk through issues that they're facing as a collective unit and ways to think about the regulation, to something a little bit more formal that has, you know, an agenda in place and some decision points. Yeah.
Something in my previous life when I started doing testing, Murray, was Steve Baker conducts quarterly environmental meetings with the testing labs.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make a motion that we do a quarterly type of meeting like that with this committee. So every quarter we're able to put these topics, challenges, concerns in front of AZDHS and move on from there. And that would be 4 meetings a year, one quarterly, which I think is what all of us kind of thought the intent of this program was going to be as well. So it would be with medical marijuana labs instead of, obviously he does air, water, and soil with environmental labs. Maybe he could find some time to do the same with cannabis.
So the only thing I'll just, and then I'll step back, is I totally agree. I just want to make sure that the opportunity extends just beyond the testing labs in terms of trying to provide real world feedback from those of us that are in the production side that have to cope with the realities of what happens when we change testing. What's the impact on the actual core business and all the other stuff you have to do with your supply chain. And I think if we can sensitize the state to some of these pain points, we can, and also improve communication to as many of us as possible, which really then can get the word out. I think it can be very effective and improve on the program. So I think a lot of us are thinking the same thing. We'd like to meet periodically at a minimum once a quarter. I'm happy to see an open agenda, but we'd like to be able to share some of our own experience more broadly and over time, because we're all looking for best practices here. We're all looking for ways to make this work, to meet our obligations with the state. And it can be challenging. It's a lot of obstacles we have to heap over. So if we're on the same page, it just makes it so much easier.
I would like to offer a friendly amendment. We just do it on the first Tuesday after each quarter starts. And then we could decide on whether there's additional meetings needed after that. So we can just schedule one per quarter, as Steve said, and then first Tuesday of every quarter. And then we can decide at that point whether we want to have more meetings.
And it should be open to everybody. We could structure it where it's focused on specific categories for the first part of the meeting and another category for the last part of the meeting. So that way we can have some structure to that.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be more thoughtful when we do meet here as a panel. So if that was a motion, I second.
Yeah. I also want to, it's more like a question for Jessica and the department. So I'm just curious what, from the department standpoint, what kind of resources or support does the department have for the stakeholder meeting? Like, for example, if there's things that we need to look into, like if there's a budget for it, I just want to get some clarification for it in addition to the time as well.
What kinds of support are you thinking of, Max? I mean, as far as platforms to host the meeting, or?
Yeah, for example, like if Steve or like anyone, here, like in on this council, like if we need to look into a certain issue, I mean, it takes money, right? So like, would there be, a budget for it, or would the department would just go ahead and take the recommendation from the stakeholder meeting? I just want to get some clarification on it. Like, what do you expect the stakeholder meeting would be, doing for the department?
So I think with this testing advisory council, we have the very specific outline and statute of creating this report every January that has to have very specific items in it. We know there are other pain points for our stakeholders, both on the dispensary side and on the testing, the lab side. And so we think there's an opportunity to have some maybe more informal stakeholder meetings pointed around specific items that they brought up in the last meeting. For example, the recall process. The dispensaries are very confused about that right now. We actually do have a recall process very much in place that our food safety team follows for every other area that they regulate. So we could have more pinpointed stakeholder meetings to explain those processes, get feedback, and make the processes work better for our licensees. So I think that's what we were really aiming for. Any recommendations that the council makes, Max, we have to go through our rulemaking process in order to actually implement any of those changes. We can't just implement them on the council's recommendation. We still have to follow our regular rulemaking processes. Does that help clarify?
Yes, thank you.
I would like to second Steve's motion.
Thank you, Andrew. Steve, can you please restate your motion?
Sure. It wasn't a motion when I did it, but so I make a motion to create a working testing council committee meeting that we quarterly with the department starting in 2022.
Second.
Quick question, if possible. So in addition to these quarterly stakeholder meetings, the council is still charged with meeting annually, correct, to make recommendation to the legislature. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but there's no actual date that it requires us to meet before, just before the end of the year, right? So
that is correct.
Okay, so theoretically, if we wanted the council to meet multiple times to actually make recommendations mid-year, if something is, in a bit of an emergency, that's possible, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I know one thing that's at the end of the day, everything bases off of Mr. Baker and his willingness to do this. So he was kind enough to pop up on screen here. So we're adding things to your plate, Steve. We're trying to, at least.
That's fine. So my one question I had, are we talking about a laboratory meeting that has participants from all sides, but have a main focus on the laboratory rules, and then another one that has more focus on the dispensary rules, but with lab participation? Are we talking about one big meeting that tries to get it all.
I think, well, personally, I would, in my view of it was one meeting that, you know, incorporates all stakeholders like we have here. We have industry, we have edible manufacturers, we have concentrate manufacturers, we have growers, we have the group that we've put together here is a very robust and very knowledgeable group of everything that's happening within the industry, from the testing lab side of it to, you know, the supply chain issues caused by testing, you know, all of the different things that we are experiencing in this industry on a daily basis. I think all stakeholders should have a place here, much like this committee does. And please, if I'm off, please somebody add something to it. I don't want to be speaking for everybody here.
So
but-
I would agree with you, Steve, both Steves, but I do think that it could be structured in a way, Mr. Baker, in the way that you phrased it in the first part of what you said. So I think it should be open and it should be categorized, and we can all come to the table the same way as we are with submitting agenda items, discussion points, and then we can structure it topic or laboratory focus in the first half, and then dispensary or other in the second half, for example, but it could just all be done at one time with everybody here.
Okay.
And Steve, I assume, and I can predict that much like the environmental meetings that I used to attend, they used to start out, well, when I first started, there were issues, and then as those issues went away, there were less and less issues. And then they just became topics. How are we doing on these and these areas and things like that?
Right. So that meeting you're talking about is an actual advisory committee where the people are appointed. And it's similar to this one. We were running it every quarter because that was part of what the committee wanted to meet at that frequency. But now we meet on a twice a year for that committee because we don't have problems with the environmental labs like we used to. So people were kind of getting used to the idea where there's not much to talk about. So hopefully we'll get that to that point here soon.
Well, we're only a year old.
That's correct. So it took us about 10 years to get to that point or so.
And I just want to reinforce the idea of having the shared conversation across those different pieces. I mean, I think one thing that we really try to talk about a lot is that we are an ecosystem. So while I think the two different ideas, both producers and testers that we've identified here as being separate parts of that ecosystem, we really can't exist without one another. So I think it's really helpful and beneficial to have us all in the same space while recognizing that we do have somewhat separate rule sets to follow as well.
Right.
So we have a motion on the table from Steve to create a working, from Steve Cottrell to create a working testing group that meets quarterly with the department starting in 2022, and a second on that. I'd just like to clarify before I take it to a vote to make sure that I and the rest of us are clear. Are you suggesting that to be a less formal group made up of folks across the entire ecosystem, as Sam says, or are you intending that to be this particular council?
My original intention was this original council. We have the leaders of each segmented part of the business. And so if at a time this, maybe yearly, we can revisit, maybe there's a different person that represents the industry. Maybe there's a different person that represents testing. Maybe there's a different person that represents edibles. Who knows? It's just different, as time goes on. I'm sure as we all are very encouraged right now to help build this new industry out. I can't say that I'm always going to want to do this, but I do right now. Hope, any question, any thoughts?
No, I think you're right on. It should, because it'll keep it focused, but I do think maybe during that time we could actually take questions, and if we don't address them during the meeting, it will be addressed at the next quarterly meeting. If people other individuals outside this group want to attend, but I think we do need to decide if it's open or closed.
Yeah.
I would like to make a point to suggest that we do allow certain subject matter experts, if it's relevant, be introduced by the council members. If there's somebody that's an expert in a particular field or particular analyses, that they can step in and speak very specifically, whereas we may understand generalities. I think it's important we have access to subject matter experts as well.
Totally agree with you, Ryan.
I think we can always invite people, but can we have an open meeting for just part of the meeting? In other words, would say the last hour of the meeting or the first hour of the meeting would be open. That way we could still conduct our business very easily, but and secure outside comments.
Yeah, I think it would be unfair, and it's unfair for me to make this, being so myopic and saying this is the group and this is only the group. We have a lot of very, very technologically advanced laboratory owners and doctors and scientists out there that I feel all should have a voice here, as well as dispensary owners and edible manufacturers and growers and everything. So I think it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to revisit who can participate in this group. That part of it, I don't know how to structure that part. I'll leave that to the experts like you, Jessica. But
so my preference would be that it's an open meeting, because we have 19 laboratories. They're in the process of coming on board. We have 2 laboratories on this panel committee. And even after the last meeting, I had a number of laboratories coming in and saying, hey, we see that pesticide. Just because they're not seeing it and different things like that. So I have always found that meeting with everybody and getting input and just having it open and talk is a much better route than having it closed and comments, and it just have it all transparent, have it all out there. We'll go through it and just have whatever comments come up.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think it'd be really helpful to just make sure that all voices are heard in these less formal situations. And then, us as a council, we have the opportunity to, like Jessica said, we could meet multiple times. We could meet when we need to make recommendations. But to get all the voices to the table, I think would be really important. And we wouldn't want to, inhibit ourselves in that way.
And it's always good to meet in person. So if we can ever get to the point where we can get back into our big conference room, it's much more effective than on Zoom to do those kind of meetings.
I agree.
Yeah, I'll take that. This is technically a public meeting, right? So we have an official from DHS saying in-person meetings are okay. I'll take it.
Well,
kidding, Steve.
I'll have to wait on Jessica on that one. She's the...
There are lots of circumstances for that. I think our challenge is that our big lab conference room is full of COVID supplies and equipment right now. Okay, thank you all for that discussion. So we have to return to the motion. Steve, I'm wondering, Cottrell, I'm wondering if you are interested in clarifying the motion at all to specify that you are intending that the MMTAC meets quarterly with the department starting in 2022, just to make sure that it's not ambiguous when we try and convey this in the report.
So to clarify, my motion is to create a working testing council meeting on a quarterly basis that involves, it's an open meeting, quarterly starting in 2022. Yeah.
And then I had a second. I just want to verify that we still have a second on this motion.
Yes.
Thank you, Max. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful, thank you. Any last comments on stakeholder meetings? Okay, thank you all so much for your feedback on that topic. I think that's very helpful as we think about how to grow this program and build on it moving forward with your comments and input. I will move on to the next agenda item, which I will hand over to Murray Stein to talk about council charter and end date. And I will just note in our agenda detail, you'll see a reference to pages 2 and 3 of Mr. Stein's presentation that he put together. So you can pull that up for reference as well. And Murray, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Really appreciate it. I apologize that we actually went through and found a couple errors in this, and we resubmitted it, a version to Jessica and Megan just before this meeting. I doubt you're going to have it. Secondly, you guys have taken the wind out of my sails, because the number one thing I really wanted to do was continue to see Megan and Jessica, and especially Steve. I got to tell you, especially Steve.
Thank you, Murray.
You're welcome.
My feelings are a little hurt.
Not just Steve, but both Steve's work. So, you know, as we have, I'll say, struggled through the last 9-10 months as we've implemented the program. Of course, adult use was on the heels of that, and that made it just that much more challenging. We have found that there's been just times where it just would have been great if we had more clarity about questions we've got, and just, you know, understood more about what the state was doing and their intent. So I'm actually on slide 2 now. I just want to emphasize that, you know, per Jessica, the council continues till July 1st, 2027, and that it references, in addition to the reporting and so forth, these additional items as necessary, which is really also referred to in House Bill 2605. Again, that the council can provide additional items or additional recommendations, and that really goes toward the conversation we just had, which was really the important intent of trying to improve communications. We, you know, there's so many things that we discovered as a result of going through this testing exercise, and we actually thought we were really prepared, and we just got caught off guard in some cases. We certainly made every possible mistake. We've tried to learn from them, but at the end of the day, there are things that have come from this lesson we really think could have gone a long way toward helping us, you know, not disappoint our customers, not disappoint our wholesalers, and really get where we needed to go. So, you know, having a vehicle for this, like a quarterly meeting where we can talk about some of the challenges that, you know, manufacturers have, in particular, in terms of being able to turn around quickly on a dime when things change, and making sure that the clarity is communicated to all the parties, especially the dispensaries. The N1 item that we see on test reports is a perfect example. We still get product that's turned away as a result of the actual receivers not understanding. So I think one of the things the council can do is really help improve that by creating, if necessary, the content that provides clarity that the state could then pass on. So you guys have decided to do that. That is so terrific. I can't tell you how excited I am to be able to look to solutions to these things. I'm going to move on to slide 4. This is the definitions. And again, I think the council can contribute by helping the state understand where we're lacking. In this particular case, I've changed this and come down to topical on the left side. There really isn't an adequate description of what a topical is. And the consequence of that for the industry has been most topical vendors have restricted their products to 100 milligrams, which really substantially dilutes the impact of the product in terms of its usage. Other states, other countries have defined topicals and give them clear distinction from infused edible products. And we really think that there needs to be some work on the definition of topical, more clarity on marijuana product, that these descriptions, such as form, really needs to be called out in all of the rules, not just in the statute or anything like that. And so we sort of went through and compared these items. One of the ones that really looms huge is the multiple cultivars, that they cannot be the same batch, because in our experience, you know, we work with as crude infusion material as possible, and the actual strain does matter to us. And, you know, I don't know that it makes sense that you can just grow everything you want into a large room, multiple strains, and still call it one batch and test calling one batch when you've got all these variety. That's what we think some of the cultivators are doing, and it's difficult for us. It's a real problem. Again, coming back to slide 5, topical products and edible products should be separated. We need to look at them differently, and I think we can come up with some language that will help the state differentiate them, as well as how they're represented in various tables. I mentioned earlier on slide 6 that Canada does something on their topicals, and I'd really like to see this council provide sufficient clarity so that the topical vendors can get back into the game with their more potent products. Remembering that topical products do not cause euphoria, that they are qualified and characterized differently in other states, and we really need to finish the work we started there. Slide 7 gives another example of what California does in this regard, so it's just useful for reference. Slide 8 refers to the table the state has kindly provided as part of their guide. You're moving a little quick for me there. We're on slide 8. We rearranged. I apologize. Poor Jessica or whomever's doing it.
I'm not doing it. I can't be trusted with the computer.
Marijuana test guide. It's a couple of tables. Is it still in there, Brandon? Slide 11. There we go. So, for example, this table doesn't really characterize edibles at all. And as I understand it, this still is present in the online guide that the state has provided. So there's things like this that are problematic. Going on to the next slide. Slide 8. Okay. There we go. So this is pretty critical, and anybody that's manufacturing any production, they're trying to provide quality, they're going to print labels. Those labels or packaging can take anywhere from a couple weeks to 3 months to produce, and generally you buy them in tens of thousands. So there's a significant cost associated with that, and we really want to ensure that when the state does make changes, they add things, that there's a grace period for anything that might affect the product labeling because of the high cost associated with that, and then effective communication to all of the stakeholders that those rules will go into place or into effect at a particular time in the future. Brandon pointed out, one of my people pointed out that R1917 table 3.1 still lacks or still contains pendimethalin, and that should probably change. And then that's basically it. Keep going, please. That's good. So right there, one back. Thank you. So the bottom line here under 311C is that, and this is again a thing that I think needs to be considered. We manufacture an edible product and we send it to a lab and it comes back 20.5% high or low. Then we obviously are going to send it to another lab. We've got 3,000 of whatever it is, send it off to another lab, and we have to wait for a positive test to come back, a passing test, before we send it to a third lab. The challenge for us is it goes to one lab and typically spends anywhere from 2 to as long as 10 weeks, if you go back to 9 months ago, in that testing cycle. Let's say we're optimal and we get it within, say, 10 days or 2 weeks, we've got the infused product testing results, it fails, I send it for another round of testing with the first lab, and then it comes back, let's say it's positive, I then have to have that lab send it to yet another lab. So now I've got 6 weeks from the time I manufactured that product. It really plays havoc with our shelf life. We would really like the labs or the state to consider when you fail a test, if you send it off for another test, that it's sent off to 2 other labs at the same time. I'd rather pay the extra fee and be able to get the product on the shelf 2 to 4 weeks sooner. So some consideration would really improve turnaround for us, and we'd really love to see that. We'd also like to see retest added to required actions available to fail potency. I don't have a lot of remediation opportunities if a brownie fails, so I really need to retest it. So we want to make sure that's clearly described. And then this is one that you'll have fun with. The last one, at what points do the labs need to conform to 410D1 about being analyzed within 10 calendar days. I already know the answer to that. I just threw that in there to mess with you guys. And then lastly, our own experience of 5 months of planning and implementation. These things, really played havoc, and we took the state on its word that, we'd have at least 5 or 6 labs up and going. And of course that didn't happen. And then we got products pushed back, and there was stuff in the supply chain that there was no clarity about what we could do. So we had to return that. It was just really challenging. And I don't want to fault anybody. I think everybody did as good a job as they could, considering, and I have huge respect for the state in terms of the front end work they did in terms of helping the testing committee really get to where we needed to at the beginning. But I do think there's an opportunity to improve upon things, and that's why I'm really supportive of having this ongoing meeting. So I'll get off my soapbox now and turn it back over to you guys. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Murray, for that. And I'll just note to council members that a few of the items that Murray covered also appear later in the agenda. So just for your awareness, there are some of the dispensary discussion items a little bit lower down that Murray covered related to the definitions, labeling requirements, the table 3.1 testing requirements, and retests. So we got those knocked out with an introduction by Murray. Thank you for that. And I'll open it up for comment by council members.
This is Hope. I wanted to clarify, and I apologize. I may have to, I obviously need to go back, but I want to talk about batch. So I'm going to put my grower's hat on here, not thinking about edibles and that kind of batch. I want to talk about if you have a growing room. I really did think that if it was coming from the same harvest, so somebody correct me here, because I must be remembering this wrong, Murray. If it was coming from the same harvest, it could be considered the same batch. Am I remembering that correctly or incorrectly? Could somebody help me?
I hope, if I do recall, it's when it's planted and grown in the same conditions and environments and harvested at the same time. But obviously, different genetics, as you're well aware, respond differently to the environment than others. Some are more susceptible with certain things than others. Some have more accumulation of contamination and things like that within the tissue or just the genetics itself. So that's where the problem is that people are taking 20, 30 strains and saying that that is one batch, whereas obviously that doesn't make any sense as far as from a safety and science standpoint.
So in some ways, so on that note, to follow through on the thought is, as a grower, if I'm planting in a single space, everything is typically hit with the same environment, the same pesticides, the same beneficials, if it's harvested within the same 24 hours and is going through the same dry cure period. If there's a powdery mildew outbreak within that space, it's not contained to the one genetic, it's going to spread. And it really has to do with overall facility, cultivation facility, cleanliness, their ability to do a PPM. So I think, especially if I was a grower and I was doing pheno hunts, for example, and I had each row, for example, as a different genetic that I'm testing, I wouldn't want to have to test every 5 or 20 plants as a batch if they all were planted on the same time and then harvested on the same time in the same environment. So I would actually, unless somebody can share some data with me, because that's what I do is go into these grows and all grows, and I've seen the same thing over and over again if it's one room. I would not make the same statement when it comes to edibles, for example, or the like. So I don't want to confuse the matter. I want to be very specific on flower right now, talking about batches.
I personally don't see the benefit to, back to your point, 10 rows, 10 different strains. I don't want to have 10 different strains is going to be 10 different phenotypes, which means it's going to be 10 different analysis, 10 different products for the different customers. So I can't have it all labeled OG Kush. I have to have it in each of their names so I can sell it as a retail outlet. It doesn't make sense for me to sell one strain that has, well, it doesn't make sense for me to sell it like that.
Yeah, so I'm seeing the.
Maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm different at Curaleaf, That's how we do. We test
So
every
I
strain.
think if I, again, getting back to that concern, because I remember we discussed this last year and it was, if it was for pesticides, it should be considered a batch. If it was for heavy metals or the microbial, there's no reason for those to be different batches. But when it comes to percentages, then yes. So maybe we do have a problem there. And if it's something that we could differentiate in some way, because that is a huge cost and it would lead to increased turnaround times for the labs. If we have, for one room, we had 30 things that were tested, and really we just need to get the flour, for example, just have those percentages being isolated and having done for each genetic, whereas as a cultivated batch, I don't see any reason why those couldn't all be considered one batch. I'd be curious, Matt, what you think too on that end, being a grower as well.
I would agree with what you're saying there, Hope. I mean, it really depends on the SKU and what the intended use of the batch is. You know, if it's a blended batch and it's going to be homogenized, I could see one test following for that. But if you're going to break out those SKUs, you almost need to have that differentiation. Correct.
Yeah.
It almost needs to follow the SKU or the intended final product. And then beyond that, if it changes, you know, from a concentrate or a flour, or you know what I mean, if it changes, phase change.
And I might get punched later for saying this, but if you have a different strain in your cultivation and you're sitting next to a different strain, I know it's redundant by doing the same mold test, doing the same pesticide test, but I can't get a universal mold and pesticide test with two different strain names on it. So I have to have a complete test for OG Kush, and I have to have a complete test for AK-47. I have to. That's part of the deal.
I think that's why it follows the SKU more correctly, to your point, Steve.
Yeah.
Well, and
it's
it's
easier
a different
for-
product.
it's easier
the
from
same. So
a
every product
labeling,
has to
and
be
it's-
tested.
Sorry, I think we're talking over each other. Sorry, I'm gonna let other people speak because I have like a lot.
No, sorry, Hope. I was just making the point to Steve's point, as that would be defined as a different product. If you go into your POS and you ring an OG Kush or AK-47, you don't account for those the same. Those are two different products, probably two different prices, two different potencies. So the first line in the statute says that all marijuana products shall be tested and lists what it'll be tested for. That's a different product. So, and to the point of like pheno hunting, that's not really a product. That's an R&D test. That's not something where you have to get the full panel. You just get the information that's most relevant to you. And then when you decide on what pheno you want, and then you're bringing it to market, then obviously those individual strains or genetics would need full panel testing because they're separate products.
So, and I do agree from the paperwork and the administrative of this. I do think that in our quarterly, we need to come up with a solution. It sounds like we need to do, for right now, until there's a better solution, it needs to move towards every cultivar needs to be tested. But as a grower, I'm really opposed to that, especially if I'm just selling it as flour. And I think we need to be creative as a panel. And there's not going to be a solution today, but I think as a panel, we've got to come up with and propose some solutions, because that seems to be very overkill in my mind when it comes to if you're selling it as flour.
I'll just mention one thing that I think might be at issue here, because Hope, I agree with everything you're talking about right now fundamentally. But yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this the last meeting. Philosophically, our program is built on the fact that the transaction is what is the only thing that matters, and like essentially everything's reverse engineered from that. So when you're talking about kind of that environment testing or room testing, or like whole greenhouse testing across different cultivars, like that doesn't jive with the rest of the way that the program's structured. But I'm wondering, and maybe I'm getting ahead of what Steve Baker may talk about in a little bit, but I think the foundation of what we'll talk about in terms of heavy metal, kind of you can work your way into more of an audit cycle with heavy metals. That might build the framework for something that you'll be able to kind of mold into what you're trying to achieve further down the line.
That's a good point. And I mean, again, I just want to think if it's really important that I think that we focus on that, on some sort of solution down the road, because if it is one growing environment, most people are not putting genetics in a grow room that have different harvest times. You know, it doesn't make that, from that business perspective, they typically all will be doing much of the same thing, and they'll take down the rows at the same time and actually set the tables at the same time. So I'll pay attention more to that. I'm just kind of letting this group know this is something that I'm going to be thinking a lot about. We've got to come up with a different type of solution, but I understand the administrative point, and I understand, good point, thank you, Sam, on the fact that it is kind of the downstream working backwards. I'm
just have
really upset about that.
I have one quick thought, Hope. I was just wondering, why couldn't we do the analyte testing and have that a pass fail, and then do the strength or that testing separately? And how would it hurt our patients to do that? And I guess I'm not finding where this is really protecting patients. It really is just a cost factor for the growers. Because if all the analytes test out correctly, and the only thing we don't have is, like we said, the strains, THC content and cannabinoid content, then maybe those could be separate tests. And I'm just speaking here and for discussion point. I'm not necessarily making a motion. So.
I do think if we get more data as far as what the labs have seen, as far as how homogeneous things might be showing, what the trends are, having a better idea as a collective panel of what the general trends are. So that's going to be real key. You guys talked about that in the last meeting. So that information will be really key in my mind for us to be able to make some real meaningful changes like what you're suggesting, Andrew. I think it's a good idea.
Well, I think there's a lot of variability. I was just going to say there's a lot of variability to that, Hope, because it's hard for the labs to know, is this in a different grow room? What's the environment? What's the difference? So, we can give you a list of 30 strains submitted from the same, client, and show you that all 30 strains have certain variability and levels of contaminants, potency, mostly the safety aspects, where it's not across the board. Everything tests the same for every single level of every single compound. And we've had where some fail for microbial and some do not. So, and after going into now a couple different cultivations and actually doing environmental analyses for them, these rooms vary. They're drying and packaging rooms. Some are more contaminated than others. So some products would be contaminated where others would not. So it's not just in necessarily the grow room and where you're actually cultivating the plant, but throughout the process, before these become individual products, they're exposed to a lot of other things that may cause contamination.
I agree with Brian there. We get batches, not batches, but sample like 30, 40 at a time, and testing for full panel, you'll see every single strain pop up. Some will have some pesticides, some won't. Some will have metal contamination, some won't. And it's probably all harvested at the same time and came from the same facility. But there is great variability among all the strains when they're tested individually and homogenized together.
So, and I generally agree with you on that. I mean, you could take the same cola from the same plant and take a bud from the same cola at one part of the cola and take a bud from the other part of the cola and still have the same variable results that everybody's talking about. That's the nature of all these legislation and these rules. So I think that I would like to see more data on that, and it would be nice to know if they were coming from the same batches or not, right? I mean, sure, you're gonna have microclimates. I understand that, but if you're feeding your plants from an irrigation system, if you're getting heavy metals in your crop and it's coming from your fertilizer, if it's coming from your water, if the whole room is set up that way and it's not coming from different rooms, that's not what I'm saying, the same room. So I think that those should be some considerations that we kind of try to be a little bit more creative about. I'll leave it at there. I don't want to keep going on this topic because there's no solution or motion. It's just a concern of mine that I wanted to get on the record.
Thank you, Hope, for bringing that up, and everyone for your comments and discussion on that. I think this is, like you said, Hope, a perfect example of an area to deep dive more into early next year with future meetings as recommended by the council, and maybe with some additional data collection and thought through some of those nuances to how these definitions are structured. Are there any other comments on what Murray presented? I just want to note we're about halfway through the meeting. We've got some additional items that have motions associated with them as well.
Yeah, Jessica, just to be on the record, I would actually suggest this is addressed well before next year. I think it's that big of a gap in the testing program and is actually a health concern to the patients. So just to be on record.
Thank you, Ryan. And I would clarify too, by next year, I meant like a month or two from now, in January, not next December for sure.
Okay,
So
great. That makes me
yeah.
feel better. Thank you.
That's really helpful. So thank you for clarifying that point to you. And I would ask the council members, as you think this through, it's a really good opportunity for you all to talk to your colleagues. And we got a lot of public comments in the chat around this topic as well, to see if there's anything the council can do or council members can do with your stakeholder groups and the groups that you represent to think through what more crystallized definitions could be or nuances to those to recommend. So we've got something to look at when we reconvene in the next couple months here with this council to talk about this topic. Okay. Other comments on what Murray shared? Okay, we're going to move on then to the next agenda item. This is related to some of our laboratory testing discussion items. And the first one on the list is related to generic E. coli versus STEC, the Shiga toxin producing E. coli. I will turn it over to Tabitha to kick us up on this topic. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Hi, Steve. This is from my micro department. I mentioned it last time, but we were suggesting that we test for Stec E. coli, not total, and that we run it on PCR and either it be present or absent type test if we do that. That's not my slide, but somebody put that up there.
Well, this is actually something I put together.
Oh,
So
okay. I was like, where did that come from? I didn't think I submitted that.
Jessica let me put together a PowerPoint, so I'm gonna go wild here with it. So,
Okay, all right.
all right. So should I go ahead and present it?
Yes, please share, Steve.
Okay, well, actually, it's not up for me. So do we want to do, there you go. All right, so the question, 2 years ago, we kind of brought this up and talked about it, but that was 2 years ago. You know, we've been through a lot since then. So one of the things, if we go to the next slide, I put these together from as many of the sites that I could. I heard where the STEC was the only pathogen of E. coli. That absolutely is not true. It's probably the one that you hear the most of. So this is from the CDC website, where it's talking about the 6 different E. colis that cause diarrhea, just diarrhea. In fact, the most common cause of traveler's disease that people get is from E. coli. So it typically doesn't cause serious disease, but in the case of STEC and some of these others, it does cause serious disease. So next. And this is just another one that that some of the E. coli's cause diarrhea, but also the urinary tract infections, respiratory illness, pneumonia, and other illnesses. So E. coli as a group, it's not just one that's a pathogen. So the next one here. So I did want to bring up, it's not very clear. This is coming from the food groups and why you test for generic E. coli in the food industry. And the presence of E. coli, when you have E. coli, that means that at some point you've gotten fecal contamination. And rather than having to test for all possible pathogens, E. coli is one of the best to test for, easiest to test for, one of the best indicators. It's an indicator that says we have fecal contamination in this product. It could have any other pathogen in it at this point. And if it's above a certain level, then it shouldn't be sold. So it's what most of the groups, dairy, water, and different groups are going to as far as an indicator organism for public health. Next. All right, so the FBI, I can't see what, I forget what that is, but what they're saying here is generally the method that is mostly used is culturing methods because they've been standardized and they're fairly cheap to run out there. We do have some new technologies. The problem with the PCR microarrays right now is that they're more of a qualitative instrument. They do a little bit of quantitation, but most of them have not been validated well with numbers. So when you're doing a culture procedure such as the Petri film, it's fairly easy to do, it's fairly cheap to do, and it's a standard procedure throughout the industry. Next. All right, so here's the World Health Organization just talking about how STEC, I'm going to talk about STEC specifically here. STEC is transmitted to humans primarily through the consumption of contaminated foods and raw and undercooked beef, raw milk, contaminated raw vegetables and sprouts. In Arizona, we test for this in our other laboratories. We didn't see it last year in Yuma, but the year before we had it coming up in the romaine lettuce. We also see it in some of the ground beef and different things. Actually, Jessica's the person to talk about that. Because she has that background how often this shows up. But overall, if you go to the next slide, we kind of get into the numbers. You know, the CDC is estimating there's about 48 million people get sick from food poisoning. And if you look further down their webpage, there's about 6,000 cases of STEC. So even in Arizona, if you bring it up the next slide, we actually track the number of diseases. Can you bring that up a little bit? Because by chance, or maybe I'm just not seeing it on my screen, but if you look at the different years, we probably get on average about maybe 130-ish people that get STEC per year. So it's extremely rare. When you get the outbreaks, they tend to happen in groups. So it's not like you have 130 separate incidences. And most of these are coming from, again, the raw meats. If you look at the beef industry, it's definitely something you want to test for. I asked Jessica the question, have we ever seen an STEC that's associated with a cannabis product? And not that any of us know about. So what I said 2 years ago is I believe that would be a waste of money to test for STEC. But if the committee wants to do that, we kind of said the same thing about Aspergillus, and the committee came up with, you know, the recommendation to test for it. So still believe that the E. coli is the best one to test for. I think 100 is a little high. Maybe it's okay for topicals and different things. 10, as we presented, maybe for edibles and different things, but I still believe it's the best indicator. It is the standard in the industry. So
Quick question, something that I didn't see. Thanks for putting all this together because this really helps us have a meaningful discussion. And the one major question I have is there, so I know with salmonella as one of those that can grow or can lie dormant under a certain water activity, very, very low water activity. And when it gets back into an environment of a favorable environment, it can start to proliferate again. Whereas E. coli is not one of those. If it's below a certain AW, the food industry also kind of accepts that as a guideline that maybe that might be a way for us to screen through that if something is not hitting at a certain AW, then yeah, it needs to be tested. Is there any data that you're aware of in that regard?
no. So again, salmonella is unique because it can resist drying, unlike many of the others. Again, E. coli is used as a indicator that you do have fecal contamination from some source. It may not be direct. Hopefully you don't have people directly, so anyways, I guess that's all I got, so.
Have we seen any cases of E. coli yet in the testing world since November of last year? Tabitha, Ryan?
Tabitha, you're muted again.
All the time. Sorry, I was just asking, Polly, yes, we've had a lot of MMTACs for E. coli, a lot.
Yeah, I have had some too, Steve. I don't know, not a lot, but definitely it's more than once or twice a month.
Wow, okay.
And it's in the edibles mainly, I would guess?
No.
Hmm.
The majority of it's flour for us.
Yeah, for us as well.
I can also provide the statistic that out of the 33 states and Washington, D.C. that have legalized cannabis in this country, with state agency that, they have mandate to regulate contaminant like ADHS. 35 of those, 34 states and Washington, D.C., they all regulate E. coli in general. But there are only 6 states that regulate specifically a single toxin. So, of course, I'm not a microbiologist. I actually, this is not my subject area, but I just want to provide that statistic for you guys as a reference.
Thanks, Maxwell.
Any other comments on the E. coli issue? I think the question on the table was whether to recommend to shift from generic E. coli testing requirements to the Shiga toxin producing E. coli testing requirements. Is there any interest?
Our chairman, so I think the idea of testing E. coli as an indicator of fecal contamination is probably a more useful way of testing it, because if you just test for STEC, you're only looking at a specific strain. So I fully agree, support the shifting to testing E. coli in general instead of specifically STEC.
That is what we do right now. We do test in general, not just for STEC.
Yeah, that should be fine. I mean, I don't see why there's a need to shift to just test STEC, because there are several other pathogenic strains of E. coli that can cause even worse problem.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and then as far as the remediation, so if E. coli is present in the remediation, Steve, could you maybe add, as far as the toxin, is that something that can be remediated? So in the same ways that we were thinking about remediation happening in the past? Can it be remediated, or is it, if the toxin is there, it needs to be destroyed?
It's not the toxin that's present in the product, it's the live bacteria. Once you ingest it, it's going to grow and reproduce in your body and produce the toxin that's at the same time. It's
And
not
then-
the toxin that produced already
Thank you.
in the product.
Then I agree with you then on general.
Okay. Thank you so much. It sounds like a motion is not necessary at this time then. We'll move on to the next section of our agenda, which is related to certificates of analysis and either standardization of those or a cover page. Both Joe and Tabitha submitted topics on this, so I will turn it over to Joe first and then Tabitha to chime in, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, I think generally speaking, my feelings on the topic haven't really changed since the last meeting. In my opinion, I think that registered patients and customers alike should have the ability to ask for lab test results and have some sort of standardized cover page or something that's very easily legible, readable, that has all the statutorily required analytes, listed very plainly, as opposed to, going through the entire report. And just to make it super clear, not interested in telling the labs how to do their reports at all, simply talking about potentially a standardized cover page just for uniformity. So that's really the idea behind it. I hope the group maybe has given it some more thought and maybe has a little bit more feedback, but I'm guessing Tabitha has some thoughts.
And I tend to think it is pretty standardized across the board. You're talking about a cover page. I mean, our cover page is just a cover page saying thank you for testing with us, blah, blah, blah. But they all have all the analytes that the state requires. We can't simplify that any more than they already are on there. And up at the top, I think all of us have, and we have to pass or fail for each test. And then given the nature of how many compounds we have for each test, there has to be a long list, pass or fail, the reporting on all of that is on there. So in my eyes, it's very standardized because the state lists what we have to give in that report. Everything on it is in there that we have to, except for the additional tests, which should come following the pages of the regulated testing that are not regulated, that if they opt to have additional tests done, those are on the remaining pages. So in my eyes, everything is pretty standardized on there. What I think, though, in addition, I do agree with standardization of COAs to keep them as uniform as possible. Maybe the way we present things, because we all have to have the same thing on, but maybe the way we format or something, making it easier that everybody has the same formatting. But also to make sure that no compounds are left out, because what we've seen, we didn't notice it, but some clients did notice it, that standardization would ensure that every compound that is required for regulated testing is listed on there. Some clients have said that they have counted the number of compounds and some were missing off either pesticides or residuals. And that could have been, the client necessarily might have missed not seeing it, just says the residuals has a list, but didn't notice one was missing, and the lab might have not reported it because it didn't pass or whatnot. We don't know, but it got, reported like it looked like everything was there. So I think standardization would ensure that all compounds are listed that are being tested for, that should have been tested for. And also the only in addition thing that I think for standardized COA is an expiration date for the labs to put on one, because all of them should have an expiration date. And the biggest reason for that from us, it's not because we want you to have to come back and retest the batch 3 months down the line if it, if it hasn't been sold yet. It's because microbial can grow over time depending on how you store it and the condition it's in. And we don't want it to be pulled off the shelf, have someone get sick, they retest it and say, DVT tested, it was negative at the time, now it's positive. Well, it could be a year down the line if there's no expiration date on these COAs as when this sample was tested and the validity of these results and for how long. So those are just my thoughts on the standardized COA. Like I said, everything's on there we're supposed to put on there. I don't know if the formatting's exactly the same, but everything is on there and standardized it for ADHS wanted us to put on there and provide to our clients and patients.
Thanks, Tabitha. I think, simply standardizing it would be a great first step. We certainly don't, I wouldn't expect you all to fall in line and adopt a certain cover page, but readability, legibility, clarity, obviously for more than just the patient is something that I think we're all hoping to achieve with this small change. So If you're agreeable to all the things you talked about, I think that'd be a fantastic idea. I'm curious how the rest of the council would feel about the expiration date on the COA. Not sure if that.
Thanks, Joe. I think that's a great idea, having an expiration date. I do want to speak to, because I brought this up on this topic up, and it was sent back to me as well. Train your bud tenders how to read the analysis. One of the issues that we have in this marketplace is the people that are reading the analysis, they come and go. They're not the smartest people at times, and some of them are brilliant. And the people that are brilliant remember how to read these things. But we have several people, and I know we're always trying to hire the best people we can hire. I know that everybody tries to hire the best people, but that's not always the possibility. So having a standardized analysis cover letter, whether it's from C Ford, DVT, Delta Verde, AZ Med testing, who knows where, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's all the exact same. So and you're going to have your special colors and your special logos and all that stuff on there. But there has to be a section that says, these are the standard tests by the state, and these are the ones that have been approved, or these are the ones that have failed. We just need something where I can bring in a first-time employee and he can read it and say, I understand this. We need to make it simple, stupid, because unfortunately, some of these people tend to use more of the product than maybe they should. So we need to have it a little easier.
I got a question for the state really quick. I'm sorry, Marie. Is it possible as the labs submit their COAs that your IT teams can actually have it auto-populate into a cover letter?
The state doesn't receive any tests, so.
We actually do that. Well, more or less. We were faced with the same issue, and because we manufacture edibles, we do a full panel test on the kitchen concentrate, and then finished product we test for microbials and potency. So we do have a concern about the the termination or the expiry of the concentrate, because we might be sitting on that. We'll do a large batch by tens of thousands of grams. We might be sitting on that same stuff 4 months later. The supply chain is longer than just a few months, particularly when you have products that can be frozen. So we need to be very careful about how long that expiry date is, so that it doesn't get in everybody's way. But otherwise, I really totally support what Steve said. I think that's spot on.
I think we should have an expiration date for edibles of maybe a year, as well as concentrated oil. But flour is a different animal, completely different animal, because we're dealing with moisture levels that, depending on the cultivator, he might store it at 13 or 15%, where other ones store it at 7%. Well, that 13 to 15% is likely going to, cause mold over a period of time. So, 6 months for cultivars and 1 year for edibles and concentrated oils. I'd like to hear Ryan's thoughts on that.
I honestly, Steve, my thoughts on the oil, as far as the raw material used to infuse, I certainly think we need to give a good amount of grace period there, considering how long it stays as part of the supply chain and in use. The edibles, obviously, I want to lead more towards the food safety side of it. So I don't know about a year, depending if it's a perishable item or something along those lines. I think those kind of guidelines could certainly be established, and maybe it's just a motion to recommend that those guidelines be established as to what's appropriate. I think it definitely can't be a 30 or 60 day or even really a 90 day. I think we're probably leaning more out towards the 4 to 6 months, something along those lines, and then take it based on the possibility of food safety with edibles, and obviously the concentrates perhaps even longer than all of those. So yeah, I guess it would be product by product. You're certainly right. You can't just do one across the board. But that wouldn't be hard, really, for us. That's not. I don't think so. At least considering our logistically, I don't think it would be very difficult for us. We would just assign a expiration date on a per product basis, and it would take care of itself.
So I have a comment. I think edibles are quite a bit different across the board. If you're baking, if you're making a cookie, that's one thing. If you're making a dry cap, that's dry, or if you're making a gel cap, or you're making a tincture in different solutions, I think it's up to the edible manufacturer to determine that based on the science of their product, because clearly there are huge differences there. And I think that if you took some products and made it a year to establish it across the board, I think that I would push back on that, because we have some products that have 3 months shelf life, and we have some products that have 2-year shelf life. And we take into consideration, a strong consideration as to safety and all those different things. And anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, I guess we also need to clarify, are we looking at capsules or are we looking at brownies?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference.
Yeah, stability wise too, like if we get a juice in and we test it and, we go to dispose of it the 14 days later, whenever it's already spewing with bacteria when we go to open it and stuff too, so it's going to be really hard to say without stability testing for all the products to be able to label on a good expiration date, especially on edibles.
I mean, wouldn't the FDA or somebody have a pretty reputable reference to guide us on, different shelf lives and things like that on different products, and perhaps we can apply those as consideration?
Well, what is AZDHS's stance on edibles, or not edibles? Let's take cannabis out of it, on food products that are manufactured in the States. What is their, stability requirements on that? I guess we ought to look at that, because all we're doing is basically adding an oil to them, which historically doesn't change the product.
Theoretically, an isolate could be an edible.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we do, as a manufacturer of edibles, we do shelf life studies on every product so that we can assign a warranty to that product. And, often shelf life studies are ongoing even while the product is out there. And virtually any change to a product can lead to a shelf life. I mean, at this stage where we're going with manufacturing, you change the packaging, you're looking at a shelf life study, because, it can affect things. So it's largely on, as I understand it, particularly federally, it's largely on the manufacturer of us to meet our claims in terms of our product, and to do everything we can to ensure that we meet both statutory guidelines on the part of the state and any health guidelines that would be out there as well. We're all looking at some point at greater authority with the FDA and folks like that. It's only going to get more rigid.
I agree. I think that we should look at this as we should be looking at it, and I 100% agree with looking at it. I just don't agree with coming up with some guidelines without having solid efficacy in place. So,
And would it be
to the agenda for the next meeting?
Yeah, that's essentially what I was going to suggest. Maybe we should just have in the motion that an expiration date is required on the COA, but the details of that we should work out in our ongoing quarterly meetings. But at this point, each producer or cultivator or whatever can just choose their expiration date. But as long as we have it on there for now and kind of get used to that idea, that might be a good first step. And any thoughts on that?
I like that from a function or a process standpoint, and I'll use my answer there as a leverage to say the one thing that I was thinking about in terms of this. I think it's a really good conversation to have, but I just my goal here, right, is to make sure that we always keep an eye on kind of the marketplace of this. And there was a real need to make sure that May 1st list of pesticides was enforced as of May 1st, but that caused a significant amount of market confusion around that. So I just wanted to highlight that a part of our conversation should also be a lot of proactive education in the supply chain, as well as perhaps, maybe a long lead time into when those expiration dates are effective, just to help kind of the that kind of the market absorb that a little bit. You don't want someone to reject an order because you're within 60 days of a product expiration date or something like that, unless it's actually been available for sale for X amount of days, right? So just want to talk through the real world implications of these types of decisions. And perhaps when the expiration date starts, right? Like how shelf stable is mother oil You know, is it only the finished product that has the expiration date? You know, those types of questions.
You know, we could think about a requirement that would require all edible manufacturers to place a expiration date on their products. That could be a good start. But, you know, I think it does deserve a lot more discussion.
And also just to make sure we're redirecting to the initial point was the expiration date, not just of edibles, but on the COA itself, right? So this is across all products, and I can see logistically where it's a nightmare and there's a lot to discuss on the edible side. But I just want to make sure that we don't forget we're also trying to address all products as far as what an expiration, and it needs to be uniform across all labs. I mean, it's the right thing to do.
Well, one thing I think that I don't think it's possible to put the expiration date on the package as the same date as the expiration date on the COA. And I say that because the product is going to be made before the analysis happens. Thus, the product expiration date should actually be earlier. It's manufactured earlier than your COA comes out. So I think it should be a born on date, if you will.
It may be worthwhile for the council to consider, and I've noted it as a topic area for future meeting. If there's not pressure to make a specific motion necessarily around a topic, if we don't feel like we're at that place yet either. So go ahead. Hope, was that you that I interrupted?
That's okay. It was more discussion, but I think if there was if the individuals submitting the sample for testing was to provide the expiration date as part of their sample submission, that might be a way to address Ryan's concern, also Steve's concern and Andrew's concern. But at the same time, we need data. I just don't think we should be necessarily making rules without data. And then who's generating the data? I do think having the uniformity is key. And because we want not only for the bud tenders to be able to read things, we want actually the patients and the customers to be able to understand the reports. And so there is some education there, and I do think there's some further discussion. I'll just leave it at that, and we can keep going on. Thanks.
No, that's well said, Hope. I think if it's okay with the group, let's leave the expiration date portion out of this for now, with the understanding that we'll pick it back up in our next, quarterly meeting. But for now, and Tabitha, feel free to correct me, I think it's probably safe to go ahead and make a motion to ask for some sort of standardization. Would you mind making that motion, Tabitha? I'd really hate to get the wording wrong. I just want to make sure we're not being overly burdensome to the labs and everying. Not to put you on the spot, sorry.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah.
I've never done this before. This is my first rodeo. So I make a motion to suggest in future meetings a standardization of all COAs to include an expiration date.
And I'd like to volunteer that at our next meeting, I'll spend a few minutes and show you what we think is a reasonable time frame where expiration dates would kick in. The terminology that we have learned is probably the best approach to take with products like this. And it's typically something like best if used by. So there's actual language that you can elect to use based on FDA guidelines. And of course, that's where we're looking. We're looking down the road at FDA guidelines. And if we do talk about this in the coming meetings, I think there's a real benefit. We can avoid a problem which many of us faced in terms of the use of the word serving size, which has a different meaning with the FDA than it does with the state of Arizona and the rules regarding edibles. There goes Hope. She's probably heard this. Anyway, it's frustrating because we're trying to talk about two different things with customers, and we need to bring clarity and a view of greater regulation and matching what the feds do, however they do it, especially with regard to edibles. So I'm willing to step up, explain what we do, show you how our shelf life studies work so you can understand what a reasonable process should be, and then maybe suggest a timeline as to what a COA might be in our experience, when we would use that cannabis oil material and when the products might show up afterward, to give you a real world sense of what that's like. And I'm happy to do that at the next meeting.
I do though, Murray, just want to point out, I think that we may be, I think that's going to be a helpful discussion, but I think that, I think Ryan made this point earlier, that we're talking potentially about two different things, the expiration date of the actual cert and the expiration date of the product, which in most cases could be different dates. So obviously there's a, tangential connection to those, but I think that I think some of the protection from liability would maybe somewhere the labs are coming from on the expiration of the cert versus, the liability of the producer, which would be the best used by or the that for the actual product.
You understand that
Exactly. Good. Well said, Sam.
the expiration of the COA on the original source medicine is as critical to us as the subsequent potency and microbial test. Those two are put together, and we actually put the two tests together, and we put a cover sheet on ours that indicates that they pass all those testing, just to make it simple for Steve's people. Okay, not you, Steve Baker.
Second,
No need for that, and so I honestly think that when the COA for the source meds go out, that matters to us almost as much as when the COA for our own edibles is complete, or when it expires.
In the meantime, like I said, my biggest concern with this is we test something early on before it hits the shelf. 6 months later, a patient becomes sick, ADHS gets involved, pulls the product, tests it, it tests positive for microbial. Who's held liable for that? We tested it at the time, it didn't. I just worry about our names going in the headlines. DVT tested it, it said it was clean and free, it was on the shelves, and maybe it was when we tested it, but at that point it's not. So that's why I think it's pretty critical, especially to protect the laboratories at the time we tested it, when we did, that it was clean and free, not 6 months later when who knows how it was stored, even if it was stored improperly by the patient, who knows?
This is why we carry product liability insurance.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Doesn't protect my name for being in the headlines as the one that tested it though. And that doesn't look good for
We're gonna
us.
keep you out of the news.
Did we make a second to that? Because I think Joe, you made a second? All right. Hey, also, I want to, one thing that we kind of skipped over here was our previous conversation about did we make a motion on the cover page for?
No, we're gonna have to do this one first because it's on the table, but I'll do that right after, or you can, Steve, if you'd like.
Please, by all means.
Great. So related to the expiration date, Tabitha, I'm so sorry to make you do this again. Can you repeat your motion, please?
You're killing me, Smalls. Okay.
I know.
I want to make a motion to suggest in a future meeting that we talk about providing a standardized COA that includes an expiration date from when we tested the product. Not as good as the first, but that's not my
Second the
fault.
motion.
Thank you. Who seconded? Sorry, I was looking down. Steve Cottrell. Thanks, Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. And then Joe, were you going to follow up with another motion?
No, I think she covered it by saying we were gonna talk about COAs later, so I think we're good.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, guys. Just as a time check, we've got about 15 minutes or so before we've got to wrap with a summary of next steps and that report follow-up. The next item is related to changes by client request, and I'll turn it to Tabitha and Ryan.
Megan, you're on mute, Tab.
Sorry. Okay. From time to time we get, and I'm just really, we will do it most cases. I think, okay, so from time to time we get requests that either a sample was submitted with the wrong name, batch number or whatnot, and it's a COA that's already went out and the client requests us to change that. Before testing became regulated, and it was in the time that the rules were being made, I did email Steve Baker along with his colleagues and asked if that was okay. And at the time, if I'm right, the email said to just keep the email for our reference and who wanted that change and such not. But we get a lot of those moving forward, a lot of batch number changes or name changes. To me, it just looks very, I'm not saying that it's a lie at all. I'm just saying it looks very sketchy for us to put out a COA that's clean and free, and then we have to change the batch number or the flower or the name of the concert or whatever, and then resubmit it. It could be a real error. I'd hate for them to retest if it was, but I just think we should have some kind of process. And I'm sure the other labs have gotten the same request that they do this. I want to make sure we're doing it right, and this kind of covers us instead of, it would just look horrible if we change the results. You know what I mean? Or resubmit it to the client. I still want to be held liable for that. Just was thinking maybe we need your input or a process that we need to do for documentation, or if it's just a downright no. And my other thing was combining reports. We've gotten several people will test for one thing and then later submit for the rest of this stuff, and they want us to combine. We have not yet to do that, but because in our eyes, we have to get a whole homogenized test sample and test everything at one time. So we don't combine them, but I'm not sure how you guys feel about that, just because we get a lot of requests for that. I'm sure the other labs do as well, but those are my two.
Yeah,
things with that.
if I have a thing, we do get a lot of those requests, and prior till now, we've been told the same, to hold on to the email, and that if there was a discrepancy, DHS would expect that the licensee or producer be able to explain, why the edit was needed. But I do think, just for full transparency and for up and to cover, to make sure all these are legitimate, some type of form or function to be able to notify when these are happening and how frequently they're happening may be a good indication for DHS to know when to dig a little deeper in case it isn't a genuine goof.
And in addition, there's no traceability on there. And when they come in to audit this country, they give them a result, and there's really no traceability that there was a prior result to that. It would be for us. Steve knows everything is traceable in the lab, or it has to be.
It has to be. I think you're right, Tabitha, on that regard. So an email is one thing, but it's also not available to the public. But if there was some form that somebody had to fill out to make that request, at least that would be documentation that could be made available to the public.
So this is Steve. Since everybody's talking about what I told them, which is fine. So,
hey, somebody needs to mute, please.
So right now, what I told the labs to do is to have documentation, because there's nothing that specifies in rule that you need to have all of this on the COA. But for a COA to be scientifically valid and defensible, any kind of change that has happened should be documented on that COA or that report with the date and how it was changed. And we don't want to stop if the product was wrong or the batch was wrong or any of the information was actually wrong. Those things do happen. But if it came in as a certain name and a certain batch or strain and everything, then it should be on, and that COA is actually sent out, and then there's where people want it to change, that should be on the COA, much like a chain of custody of how things have happened with that COA. And I believe this will be addressed in rule.
I would say that'd be a great suggestion if we could maybe say that we do another qualifier on anything, or put an additional qualifier on the report and say that there was a amendment to that report. Maybe just on, I don't know where the qualifier could go to, if it's a batch name or a name, but somewhere on the report, like a qualifier that indicates that there was an amendment that was done. That would make me feel better to know that that's out there and it's actually on the second revised COA, because we do keep drafts of the reports in our LIM system. So we do know, but you guys wouldn't necessarily know if you picked a COA off the shelf that there was an amendment done to it at all.
If I could also interject on when you're considering for the rules, Steve, I seem to remember this is a frequent request, and things and mistakes do happen, but at the same time, we should de-incentivize anybody doing this. So if they do need to make a change, there should be some sort of, because this takes time, and time is money for the labs, and it also stops slowdowns. So I think there should be some sort of financial accountability if that's happening as well, because it's taking additional times for the labs. Am I wrong, Tabitha and Ryan?
It does.
No,
and
it's a hassle.
Yeah, it is a pain in the butt to have to go, and it gets changed and redrafted and resent out. It just takes us time to do it as well. And especially if there's a slew of them that have the same batch number on there or whatnot, or, you know. So it does take us time to get it done.
Well, and it's one thing on the compensation side, and I think that's appropriate to consider, but at the same time, I think just for transparency's sake, that everybody, I mean, I understand it can happen, and that's totally fine. But if it's happening every single time you're submitting, or we have one client that I swear does it every other order, and it doesn't sit right with me. It doesn't feel on the up and up. And I think everyone would prefer to know that that's not part of our industry. We're trying to build forward in good faith and integrity. So just having some type of avenue of monitoring. It doesn't have to be a whodunit or looking to get anyone, but at least having an avenue to monitor those type of edits or requests to keep everybody, honest people honest.
Don't most LIMS have that ability if there's a change, Steve, to your point, for accountability, that there's a system for that? Is there not for most of the LIMS software out there? Is that trackable enough?
Hope there is. Like, as far as if it's changed, definitely it's traceable. We have the audit trail on. And we do attach it to the COA, but it's on the back. We normally say, amended report requested per whoever and for whatever reason and what was amended. But it really, I think, for transparency, should definitely be like smack dab on the front, that if this has been amended, it's in big letters saying amendment's been made, and at least you can go and reference why the amendment was made or what happened. Just some way of adding transparency. And I don't know that I have the exact program or answer, but more of a problem to propose, I guess.
A little bit of the problem I have with it too, it's like the amended report could be 3 months down the line. You're just now catching it. I mean, I'm not going to call out anybody, and we do it, but we definitely, on our end, it's kind of sketchy for us to do that.
Could it be part of, I'm just exploring ways here, hearing from everybody. Is it possible to actually have a QR, once an amendment has been made, then there's a requirement to put a QR code on the label? That would take you immediately to that amended COA?
But I don't know how visible that would be to serve the function of informing the patient and consumer, right?
I don't think it would be very easy. Our transparency system copies all of the analysis, but if there's a different COA attached, I don't think it integrates into our system. So we try and just do one COA for everything, or for each product.
I think most labs can create a different draft that says straight and red up at the top, amended report, when they redraft their results. There should be a way. I know our LIMS system, I have a regulated report and a non-regulated report, and I'm sure I can create one more that's regulated, says, amended at the top. So I think every LIMS system can probably, just depends on what report you draft with your results, that can probably print that up at the top pretty easily. There's just nothing in the rules that state we have to do that, or how this process should be done.
And this should also be something that's standardized, that, in a certain part of the report, and we can talk about that at the stakeholder meetings where exactly that should be, but I believe it should be standardized on the COAs.
I think it's definitely needed from a industry point of view, and for customer safety, for employee knowledge. This is something that we do need to have.
Is this something the council would like to further discuss, or is there a motion that anyone would like to put forward at this time related to the topic?
I would like to make a motion. This is Ryan. I'd like to make a motion to standardize and implement a procedure for edits to COAs and how amended reports are reported to clients and patients.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm an aye.
Okay, motion. You're an aye, Andrew? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Thank you. We have 6 minutes left in this meeting. The agenda item that is remaining that we haven't discussed yet, I believe, is related to the recall processes. Joe, I think it's probably a longer discussion. Are you interested in introducing for a second time? I know we touched on it at the last meeting and then continuing it over to the next meeting.
No, we don't need, and I don't want to have it was more of a discussion point, and obviously if anyone else that wants to weigh in, I'd love to hear about it, but I feel that because of the recent recall process that occurred in weeks prior, there are obviously some gaps and some transparency issues. And I think that, we can certainly talk about that in the coming meetings and the ways to kind of, standardize. But the one thing that kind of popped into my head, because I couldn't really think of a way to really fix it, is maybe some sort of requirement for DHS to do a final report so that we can kind of get the word out that if a voluntary recall was unnecessary, or maybe it was the product was tested again and is now in fact okay, that there's a way to get that out there kind of in the world. So that was really the one item I had thought of. Would love to hear the group, but again, I know we have very limited time, so we don't need to really get into it today, but would love to talk more about it later. Yeah.
I just agree with Joe that it needs some discussion. So hopefully we can have that in long form, and perhaps, I know that Megan at the top of the meeting had mentioned that the department does have a standard process, but it's through the food safety division now. So maybe even just highlighting what the current process is and identifying where those potential gaps are at a future meeting, since we are now going to be meeting quarterly. Thank you to my colleagues for supporting that idea.
Great. Thank you all so much for your feedback. I'd just like to summarize in our meeting wrap up today, the high level points that we went over. We initiated with then approval of the report subject to the motions that were passed today, which will be included in the report, as well as updates to the deficiency related items by the end of this calendar year to be issued to the elected officials as required by statute, and of course back to the entire council as well. Other motions that were made today were related to monitoring and reporting back to ADHS, all DDVP analytes for testing. An open testing council meeting quarterly with the department starting in 2022. Sorry, I have notes everywhere, sorry.
Just to confirm, what would be the exact date for it? Do we have exact date already?
For the meeting, no. The department will get out some meeting dates.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. At a future meeting to discuss a standardized certificate of analysis that includes expiration dates from the test date. We passed another motion to standardize and improve the procedure for edits to COAs and share amended reports, also to clients and patients. And then for future meeting topics, in addition to the motion related to the COAs, we also have things related to considering the group of compounds to monitor, batch definitions, expiration dates listed on COAs, which Murray also volunteered to provide some background and information on related to product expiration dates, and then the recall process. I would like to thank the council for coming back together at the end of this year to discuss all of these items, and we really look forward to convening you and all the stakeholders next year as we continue to work together to improve the program for the benefit of patients in Arizona. So thank you so much for that, and also to our tech folks who ran this meeting. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you. We hope you have a happy new year. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica.
Can I get a motion to adjourn? Sorry, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so adjourned, so moved. The meeting is adjourned. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Sam, we didn't get to make that motion.
I know I didn't want to interrupt her at the end. I'm gonna.
I know, darn it.
Should I call right now? Well,
No,
I'll
because
leave
the
big-
committee's gone.
Yeah,
The
all right.
committee's
damn.
gone, so we can't make it. Shoot. Oh, well. You know what?
I'm gonna-
We'll get it here. We'll get it.
The next one.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, see you tomorrow.